Hello, I'm Robert McDermott, and it's my pleasure today to talk about Aristotle, the student of Plato, the other absolutely inestimably great philosopher, the quintessential philosopher, thinks about absolutely everything. So if you, I was going to give you the contents of the modern library collection of Aristotle, but I don't really need to. I could just tell you it includes metaphysics, it includes what's real, what is and how is it, and what is the relationship of large realities to smaller realities, and how high, how deep does it go, etc. All those questions are Plato dealt with dramatically, building up, tearing down, re-examining, building up again in a different way. So it has a fabulous treatment called metaphysics. So his students actually wrote these books based on their notes. We don't have anything that Aristotle wrote. That's really quite incredible, considering how wonderfully written they are. Yeah, pretty good students. And then there's the epistemology, which is in the De Anima, which is about the soul, and how does the soul work, and the active intellect and the passive intellect, and his trying to work out that solution to how does the mind know essences. Does it need forms, or can it find essences in things? And if it can find essences in things, how does it do that? And what part of the mind does that? And does the thing, whatever we're talking about, it could be a person and it could be a planet, do they somehow reveal themselves? And what kind of a relationship is that? So this is a very, very careful, wonderful book. Aristotle then also did the ethics, the Nicomachean ethics, which is one of the most important, not just famous and honored, but continuing influential book in the field of ethics. In a certain sense, he creates all these fields. Plato took up many questions and the relationships among them, but he didn't organize them into fields as Aristotle. Oh, I forgot to mention logic. It's Aristotle who teaches us about the divided, that is, it's either A or not A, and there's no divided middle, which of course is questioned by certain kinds of logics. Nevertheless, it was the logical principle in the West for 2,400 years. Got a major principle, and if you're going to violate it, you really better know what you're doing, because it takes a lot of sophisticated thinking to figure out how you can sort of break into the logical dualism of A and not A. Many other important logical principles and at the basis of Western thought. Then there's also the well, we're going to have to leave that for a minute until we go on to, so the ethics is where Aristotle's trying to find out about the good and happiness, and which activities bring happiness and which ones lead to unhappiness, injustice, etc. And he goes right to the core. The most fundamental questions get raised and answered in this logical, lawyer-like way. Not sophistic lawyer, but real philosophic lawyer. He also wrote a book on the politics, where he studies constitutions and tries to say what is the right form of government, and we don't really know for certain. We don't have a philosopher king. We don't really have control over, we can't just kind of impose what we want. We have to study, and then we have to experiment, we have to make revisions. So it's a process, a long, complicated process by a group of people thinking really hard and long. And he wrote the Poetics, which is really an aesthetics, but it's mostly about drama. And he's the one who figures out what's really happening in Greek tragedies, and about the the sort of the transformation that comes in tragedy and terrible suffering, which then brings about enlightenment and transformation. And he gets all that clear. What's a tragedy? What's a comedy? He also wrote a whole book, which isn't usually reproduced, but it's very, very wonderful. In the complete Aristotle, you would get his book on biology and zoology and his study of plants and his animals, and how he watches animals for hours on end in order to figure out what they're doing, what kind of feelings they have, and how do we organize them, etc. So I'm probably leaving out all kinds of things that are totally wonderful in Aristotle. His mind is completely comprehensive, orderly, systematic, and intuitive as well. It's not plodding and pedestrian at all. That's great insight. And he is really the equal to Plato, and it's quite possible that there is no other equal to Plato except him, and no one else equal to him except Plato. Okay, now when he starts out, he's a student of Plato, and he's inspired, informed, enlightened, inspired by the Platonic vision of the good and these forms or ideas, and they're real to him as they ought to have been, in the sense of, if you come under Plato's spell, you just know that Plato somehow knows these things. He's not casually just throwing them out and just introducing them. No, he has this relationship to a level of reality that it's very hard to attain. But when someone attains it, as presumably Plato did, sort of exposing the extent of my own Platonism, then it's observable. You say, yeah, I don't know that, but it sure looks like he does. So that's how Aristotle starts out. But then when he wants to figure out exactly how the upper story, the ideal forms, are related to particulars, to particular moments, to particular thoughts, to particular objects, particular processes, he thinks that they're too separate. Now, interestingly, in the beginning of the Metaphysics, he raises 5 criticisms of the Platonic forms. And guess what? They're all in Plato. Plato himself, after the Republic, in the Theaetetus and the Sophist, he raises these questions. And he puts in there, oh dear, this is embarrassing. Is there a form for mud? Is there a form for mustache? Basically, Plato confronts the fact that he's kind of stuck with 2 realities. At the lower level, just reproduces the upper level in a way that is not really what he wanted. So he has this concept of eros, which is a joining. It's an attraction of the upper story and the lower story, especially the lower story seeking the upper story, which leads, of course, directly into Christianity and somebody like Augustine in the 5th, 4th century, saying that my heart is restless until I rest in thee. So here I am, a fleeting, sense-based, practical, pleasure-seeking animal in search for divine forms, divine ideas, divine realities. That is you, O Lord, whom I have found after going through the Manichaeans and the Neoplatonists to the Gospel of the Epistles of Paul and the Gospel of John. Okay, so Aristotle then is trying to bring the upper story and the lower story together. And in his epistemology, he says that the passive intellect, which receives sense impressions, of course, cannot reach the forms and does not represent the higher state of mentality or human life. But there's an active intellect which enters into the rest of reality. It is the joining of all the levels of mind. So by my active intellect, I am able to know a person in his or her essential reality, his or her soul, his or her essence. Because I am not an essence maker, but I'm an essence knower. By my active intellect, I can join the essential defining character that Plato sort of tried to somewhat immortalize, and Aristotle says, no, it's not immortal and it's not infinite, it's not permanent, it's not unchanging, but it is the defining element. And we can know that about the human, and we can know what is human and what is not, what is a human sort of counterfeit. And so the human, it turns out, and this is where he's going, this is sort of the middle book of his Republic, what the human is and what the human should think, or is ideally, and what the human should think, and what the human should do, since he's very focused on behavior and action, is what is in the ultimate order of things. A little bit like Plato's The Good. Guess what? That is to say that nature has a telos, has a goal. It is striving, and it is striving essentially by the dictates of reason, that nature proceeds toward the rational, and as we approach the rational, we have the capacity to experience happiness. The ultimate pleasure might seem to many people to be physical, basically food, drink, and sex, and maybe something to do with nature, and something to do with beautiful sights, beautiful persons, beautiful sunset. They're all really good, according to Aristotle. He does not have this, does not push things away as negative because they're not the ultimate. Not at all. There's a graded quality to his thinking. But he does say, if you really want happiness that lasts, that is defining and is a criterion for all other candidates for happiness, then you need to think contemplatively. You need to think about being as such. You need to think about reason as such. You need to think about the cause that is the cause of all things, that is uncaused. If you think that thought, you'll then begin to understand causation, and you'll understand particulars in relation to generalities, and you'll be able to organize your knowledge, you'll be able to organize all the parts of your life, you'll be able to understand the ideal structure of relationships between persons, and relationship between persons and the earth and the state. And you'll be able to understand something so important, so immediate as friendship. Friendship, he says, begins with self-love and then expands into the love of other persons. And if they are the persons that you're befriending are good persons, then that will be an enduring source of happiness, because it's a good person is like a sort of a fragment of the good. So we might not know, quote, the good, but we will know when we think contemplatively, actively with our soul life, not with our bodies, but with our soul life. We will know essences, and we'll know especially the essence of the happiness that comes from friendship. So there's all kinds of happiness, there's all kinds of human relationships, but the ones that are the most valuable and the most lasting, and the ones that will serve as a criterion for everything else, are the ones that are like the Platonic forms, which we may not know in themselves, but they are nevertheless, there are essences that are like forms that organize daily life and ordinary thinking. So you can see how he's, in a way, his project is modest, more modest than Plato's Philosophy King and The Good and the Allegory of the Cave. Aristotle wouldn't go for that, you're either in the cave or you're out looking at the sun. No, we're all sort of in a community. He says we are all political animals. We're all living together, trying to figure out who our friends are, what should our activities should be, what our should be our career. All these practical things are all attempts in their way to get closer to the essence of human nature, which is the seeking of happiness, and that happiness is in a sense guaranteed by the ultimate structure of things, which is a modest, shall we say, a modest version of Plato's the Good. So in a way it comes to the politics and the ethics and the aesthetics, but it begins with an attempt to know the human soul, to know human thinking, and to know the structure of reality, and to know that the ultimate, in a somewhat Platonic way, is reason. Reason which discloses the enduring essences or realities which we should know and which we should live by, and if we do, we will be getting closer and closer to enduring happiness. All of this is, and some of it's implicit, some of it is very clear and explicit in the ethics. So that's the introduction for Aristotle, and I may do another one, but I may not. We'll see. Thank you.